The light in the engine room of the Galactic Envoy was a cool, sterile blue, reflecting off the polished chrome of the ship's main drive core. Every line was a perfect curve, every component a masterpiece of crystalline-laced alloy, pulsing with controlled energy. For the renowned chief engineer Cathar, this was a symphony of logical perfection. It was also a cacophony of utter, maddening failure. For the past 3 cycles, a catastrophic resonance cascade had threatened to tear the drive core apart. The ship, on a critical diplomatic mission to the volatile Tokal Concordat, was stranded in the inky void between star systems. Cathar, a being whose entire existence was dedicated to precision and order, had tried everything. He had rerouted power conduits, recalibrated the quantum flux regulators, and consulted the vast archives of his race's collective engineering knowledge. Each attempt failed, the terrible, shuddering hum of the cascade growing louder. To Cathar, the ship was a logical puzzle, and he was the most brilliant mind in the quadrant. His species, the Ethelites, had built their civilization on the principles of perfect design and flawless execution. They did not have problems. They had puzzles with elegant, predetermined solutions. But this was different. This was a flaw in the very concept of perfection. The ship was dying, and he had no answer. The captain, a being of immense patience, had finally offered a desperate, almost heretical suggestion. "We have a human on board." The Terran liaison officer mentioned something about their mechanics. Perhaps they could offer a perspective, Cathar scoffed. A Terran. They were a fledgling species, their technology a crude mess of jagged metals and primitive combustion. Their ships were a testament to chaotic brute force engineering. He could not fathom what a Terran could possibly do that he, Cathar of the Ethelites, could not. He had already spent countless hours in the engine room, a space of immaculate order and precision, with his elegant tools. The captain's request, however, was an order. Moments later, a Terran materialized in the doorway of the engine room. His name was Jake. He was a being of soft, fleshy matter, covered in a strange, thick fabric. His face was a mixture of grease and sweat, and he carried a strange, worn satchel. He was a jarring note of imperfection in a symphony of chrome and light. Jake stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the impossible complexity of the ship's core. He didn't seem overwhelmed. He didn't even seem impressed. Cathar watched as the Terran ran a hand over a control panel, his finger tracing a line on the smooth, pulsating crystalline surface. "I need to see the schematic for the primary resonance stabilizer," Jake said, his voice a low rumble. Cathar, suppressing a sigh of annoyance, activated a holographic display. The intricate, spiraling blueprint of the drive core filled the air between them. Jake stared at it for a long moment, his gaze unblinking. "I can fix it," Jake said at last, his voice utterly devoid of doubt. Cathar's vocalizer unit whirred with skepticism. "I have exhausted every known solution in our database. We have rerouted the energy flow. We have applied a phase shift inverter. What could you possibly do that we have not?" Jake turned to face him, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I can't tell you the how just yet," he said, his hand reaching for the worn satchel at his waist. "But I'm going to need a couple of tools, a hammer and some duct tape." The silence in the engine room was deafening. Cathar blinked his 6 eyes in disbelief. A hammer, duct tape. It was a blasphemy against everything he believed in. Cathar stood frozen, his 6 limbs locked in place. The words hammer and duct tape echoed in the perfectly calibrated silence of the engine room. They were not tools. They were insults. A hammer was a crude instrument of demolition, a relic from the pre-flight age of every species, designed to crush and deform. And duct tape. It was a simple, sticky fabric, used by primitives to hold things together for a short, pathetic time before they inevitably fell apart. To even suggest using such artifacts on the sacred, crystalline heart of the Galactic Envoy was an offense. "I believe you misunderstand," Terran Cathar said, his vocalizer unit producing a cold, precise tone. "This is not a repair on a simple grav cycle. This is a resonance cascade. It is an energy problem. It requires a nuanced quantum-level solution. Your tools are obsolete." Jake simply smiled, a relaxed, easy expression that seemed entirely out of place in the tense, sterile room. "Maybe so," he said, "but sometimes a problem is simpler than it looks." He unzipped his worn satchel and pulled out a battered silver object. It was a blunt, asymmetrical lump of ferrous metal attached to a crude wooden handle. To the Ethelites, it was a weapon of blunt force, a tool of chaos. To Jake, it was just a hammer. Cathar's for secondary eyes widened in shock. The sheer lack of precision, the blatant disregard for elegant design, it was a physical affront to him. He was a being who could manipulate subatomic particles with his thoughts, and this Terran wanted to solve a problem with an object designed for striking. Jake ignored the silent scorn. He approached the main drive core and, to Cathar's utter horror, pressed his ear against the pulsing crystalline surface. He closed his eyes, his messy face scrunched in concentration. He wasn't using any diagnostic tools, he was simply listening. Cathar could only see the chaotic, brute force vibrations of the resonance cascade. But the humans seemed to be discerning something else, a subtle rhythm beneath the noise. Suddenly, Jake pulled away. He walked to a small, nondescript access panel on a far wall. A piece of metal that Cathar had already scanned a dozen times. He lifted the hammer, his grip surprisingly firm. "What are you doing?" Cathar hissed, his stone-like body tense. "That panel is a non-essential structural component. Striking it will cause a systemic micro—" Jake didn't answer. He simply brought the hammer down in a single, precise, almost gentle tap. The sound of metal against metal echoed through the pristine engine room, a jarring, primal noise that felt horribly out of place. Cathar's sensory receptors screamed, bracing for the cascade of failures. But no failures came. Instead, the shuddering, discordant hum of the resonance cascade changed. The terrible noise softened, the vibrations becoming slightly more regular, less chaotic. It wasn't a perfect fix, but it was a clear, undeniable improvement. Cathar stared at the diagnostic readouts, his mind unable to reconcile the data with the action he had just witnessed. It was illogical. It was impossible. Jake then reached back into his satchel. This time, he pulled out a roll of what Cathar recognized as a crude, woven fabric, with a powerfully adhesive underside. "All right," Jake said, his voice calm. "Now for the other part." He began to unspool the duct tape. Cathar watched, horrified, as Jake unspooled the duct tape to the Lights, whose ships were a flawless tapestry of interwoven crystalline lattice. This act was a vulgar, almost obscene violation. The Terran was about to apply a crude adhesive to a system that relied on the precise flow of subatomic particles. It was like trying to stop a supernova with a handful of dust. Jake, oblivious to the alien engineer's silent disgust, tore off a long strip of the silver tape. He then approached the main drive core and, with a casualness that made Cathar's internal regulators spike, began to wrap it around a pulsing conduit. The conduit in question was a critical power regulator, a component that operated on the very edge of quantum stability. The slightest external pressure, even from a single stray particle, could throw it into disarray. But Jake just wrapped it. He smoothed out the wrinkles with his thumb and forefinger, humming a strange, tuneless Terran melody. Cathar's diagnostic screen flashed a series of alarming red warnings. The tape was interfering with the conduit's micro-vibrations, creating a chaotic energy feedback loop. The resonance cascade, which had been momentarily calmed by the tap of the hammer, began to shudder with renewed ferocity. "Terran, what have you done?" Cathar's voice rose in a panicked shriek. "You are destabilizing the entire system. The cascade is now an order of magnitude worse." Jake stopped humming and calmly stepped back. He tilted his head, listening to the renewed humming of the core, his eyes scanning the pulsating surfaces. He ignored Cathar's panicked warnings entirely. He said to himself, "I guess it wasn't a one-dimensional problem after all." Cathar's multifaceted eyes flashed. "A one-dimensional problem? You have created a multi-dimensional catastrophe. The entire ship is at risk." Jake reached for another strip of duct tape. This time he didn't wrap it around the conduit. He carefully tore it into several smaller pieces, each one a perfectly measured length. He then started to apply these smaller pieces to different parts of the drive core, a tiny piece on a crystalline joint, another on a glowing circuit, and a third on a support strut. It was a bizarre, almost ritualistic process. He was not just sticking things together, he was creating a pattern, a strange, asymmetrical patchwork of adhesive. Cathar's diagnostic screen was now a cacophony of flashing warnings. The ship's internal regulators were working overtime to counteract the Terran's haphazard fix. But then, a new pattern began to emerge. The resonance cascade, which had been a wild, chaotic roar, started to ebb and flow in a more predictable, rhythmic way. The shuddering lessened, the noise softened. The terrifying, destructive energy was no longer trying to tear the ship apart. It was contained. Cathar watched in stunned silence. The Terran had not solved the problem, he had simply muzzled it. He had taken a system of perfect logical complexity and, with a hammer and a roll of primitive tape, had reduced its terrifying power to a manageable, almost docile hum. Jake, having finished his strange ritual, turned to Cathar with a tired, grease-stained smile. There, he said. Temporary fix. It'll get us to the Tokal Concordat. No problem. The galactic envoy resumed its journey, but it was not the same ship. The low sonorous hum of the main drive core was gone, replaced by a strange, quiet thrum, punctuated by a faint, barely audible vibration. It was a sound that grated against the precise, harmonious engineering sensibilities of the To Cathar, it was the sound of a beautiful symphony being played on a crude out-of-tune instrument. The temporary fix held Cathar spent the next 12 cycles in the engine room, a silent, tormented guardian. His 4 primary eyes were glued to the diagnostic readouts, searching for any sign of failure. The screens, however, showed a shocking reality. The resonance cascade was contained. The energy fluctuations, which should have been spiraling out of control, were instead trapped in a predictable, contained loop. The duct tape, a flimsy adhesive strip, was somehow doing the work of a quantum stabilizer. His entire existence was a library of logical solutions. Every problem had an elegant, predetermined answer. But the duct tape fix had no entry in his mental archives. He ran countless simulations, attempting to replicate the Terran's chaotic method, but the results were always catastrophic. His logic told him the ship should have torn itself apart, but it was flying, its course a perfect, unwavering line through the stars. Driven by annoying curiosity, Cathar left the engine room and sought out Jake. He found the Terran in the ship's mess hall, a chaotic place filled with a medley of aromas and a cacophony of different languages. Jake was sitting at a table, sketching on a small paper pad. He seemed completely at ease, as if he hadn't just saved a multi-billion credit starship with the equivalent of a primitive bandage. Terran, Cathar said, his voice unusually low. Jake looked up, a friendly smile on his face. Hey Cathar, everything holding together back there? It is, Cathar admitted, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. But I do not understand. My diagnostics show that the resonance is being contained. But the solution, ... it defies all logic. The duct tape has no elegant properties. The hammer has no subtle application. There is no science. Jake leaned back in his chair and gestured to a small, intricate Terran toy he was drawing. It's not about the science, Professor, it's about knowing the machine. He pointed to a small, nearly invisible scratch on the drawing. See that? The scratch is what's causing the problem. The tap of the hammer on that panel, it just shifted the resonance just enough to change the vibrational pattern. The tape ... it just holds the good pattern in place. The machine was telling me what was wrong, I just had to listen to its voice. Cathar's photoreceptor's word. The machine has no voice, it has data, logic. Sure, Jake replied, but it's got a soul, too. Every machine does. You just have to know how to listen. You can't just fix a car, you gotta know the car. Same with a spaceship. It's not a puzzle, it's a friend with a problem. Cathar stood there, his mind reeling. The Terran was talking about a relationship with a non-sentient object, a feeling. It was a concept so alien, so utterly illogical, that it shattered the very foundations of his engineering philosophy. Just then, the ship's alarm systems chimed. They had arrived at their destination, the glittering high-tech orbital port of the Tokal Concordat. The temporary fix had held. The docking procedure was flawless. The galactic envoy glided into its designated berth at the Tokal Concordat's orbital port, its external hull pristine and its interior systems humming with controlled energy. The strange, low thrum of the engine core was the only discordant note in the symphony of the advanced space station. As the airlock cycled open, the crew breathed a collective sigh of relief, none more so than Cathar. Their relief was short-lived. The Tokal, a species whose engineering prowess was legendary throughout the quadrant, were not just waiting to greet the diplomats. They had sent their own team of chief engineers to inspect the ship, a standard procedure for a vessel of its class. The Tokal were beings of pure, fluid energy contained within crystalline shells. Their minds were like interconnected supercomputers, capable of solving equations that would take Cathar's species a full cycle to calculate. To them, the Etherlight's engineering was impressive. Terran engineering was a biological joke. The Tokal lead engineer, a being named Xyla, floated into the engine room. His crystalline form shimmered with authority. He scanned the Etherlight systems with a silent, comprehensive gaze, his presence alone a diagnostic tool. Then his gaze fell upon the main drive core, and he froze. His crystalline shell dimmed in confusion as his sensors detected the illogical presence of the Terran S-Fix. Chief Engineer Cathod Xyla's telepathic voice resonated in Cathod's mind, a pure, cold tone. Your drive core, it appears to be in a state of contained chaos. What is that material? It is not of your design. Cathar felt a profound sense of humiliation. He had to explain the unexplainable to the most brilliant engineers in the galaxy. That is, Terran adhesive, they call it. DUCT tape. Xyla's light dimmed further. He could feel the chaotic, unscientific nature of the fix grating against his own perfect systems. He saw the hammer marks on the non-essential panel, the strange asymmetrical patterns of the tape. He consulted his own vast archives, but the fix had no logical basis. It was a contradiction. Meanwhile, Jake, completely unbothered by the high-stakes inspection, was in the diplomatic receiving area, chatting with a Takar liaison about the surprising efficiency of the port sanitation bots. His nonchalance in the face of such a critical event was as baffling to the Takar as his hammer and tape. Back in the engine room, Xyla and his team surrounded the drive core, running diagnostics, and sending probes to analyze the tape's molecular structure. They found nothing. No quantum properties, no hidden technology. It was just a sticky fabric and a few dents from a blunt piece of metal. Xyla turned back to Cathar, his form shimmering with a new kind of energy, not anger, but pure, unadulterated fascination. The Terran did this with his hands, with these primitive tools. He did not rely on any schematics or data. He did not, Cathar replied, feeling a strange mixture of pride and intellectual defeat. He said he was listening to the machine. Xyla processed this for a long moment. He now understood that the Terran fix was not a solution he could replicate. It was a personal, intuitive act, a type of engineering so foreign that it was almost magical. The Terrans were not logical beings. They were a species that had forged a symbiotic, almost spiritual bond with the very machines they created. Fascinating, Xyla's thought echoed. Tell the Terran his fix will suffice. We will proceed with the diplomatic proceedings. The diplomatic meetings concluded with a full accord, a testament to the captain's skill and the silent, baffling thrum of the engine core that had held firm throughout the entire negotiation. As the galactic envoy prepared for its departure, Cathar stood in the airlock, his mind a storm of philosophical turmoil. He was a master engineer, a being of perfect logic and design, but his most perfect creation had been saved by a chaotic, illogical act. He saw Jake standing by the gangway, his worn satchel slung over his shoulder, a grease-stained hand waving to the Tokol liaison. He was so, unassuming. So messy. Cathar knew he had to speak to him one last time. Terran, he said, his voice hesitant. Jake, I do not understand. Jake turned, his smile still calm and easy. Not much to get, Professor. We're just fixing things, you know. But your methods, Cathar said, his voice rising in frustration. They defy everything I know. The laws of physics, the principles of design, the very nature of energy itself. You did not have a logical solution. You had a feeling. Jake's smile softened. He unzipped his satchel and pulled out the hammer and the roll of duct tape. He held them out for Cathar to see. We Terrans have a saying, Professor. If it's stupid and it works, it ain't stupid. Cathar's photoreceptor's word, but it is illogical. The elegance is gone. The perfection is marred. Perfection is for machines, Jake replied, his voice a low rumble. We Terrans, we're not perfect. Our machines aren't perfect either. They break down in weird, unexpected ways. So we learn to improvise, to listen for the subtle sounds, to feel for the little vibrations. We learn that sometimes a machine, just like a person, doesn't need a flawless solution. It just needs a little bit of attention, a little understanding. Cathar stood there, his mind processing a truth that was more complex and more profound than any equation he had ever solved. The Terran was talking about a relationship with chaos, an acceptance of imperfection. Jake then did something that would forever be etched in Cathar's memory. He gently placed the hammer and the roll of duct tape into the Etherlite's six-fingered grasp. The primitive tools felt heavy and alien in Cathar's hand, a weight of a lesson he could never have learned in a lecture hall. Keep them, Jake said, his smile genuine, not for fixing things, but just as a reminder. As Jake turned and boarded the shuttle back to his ship, Cathar stood alone in the airlock, a master engineer holding a tool of destruction and a strip of adhesive. The galactic envoy detached from the port, its perfect, flawless body now thrumming with the strange, quiet hum of a Terran fix. Cathar did not return to his homeworld with a perfect ship. He returned with a new, beautiful, and utterly illogical truth. And from that day forward the great engineer began to see his perfect machines not just as logical puzzles, but as objects with a voice and a soul, a lesson he learned from a human, a hammer, and a roll of duct tape.